Welcome to the Book Fair Podcast. My name is Anthony, and this show is all about children's literature and protecting the freedom to read. This week we have an interview with Annette Bay Pimentel and Faith Prey, the author and illustrator duo behind How a Bear Became a Book, the collaboration that created Winnie-the-Pooh. Next Wednesday, we will have an episode covering the latest releases for young readers, and on Friday, we will have another interview. So make sure to follow and leave a review if you want to stay up to date on the latest news in children's literature. Now let's get started with this week's interview. I'm excited to have both of you here. Can we start just by having you two introduce yourselves? We can start with Annette.
I work and live and work in Moscow, Idaho. My name's Annette Bay Pimentel, and I write books for young readers about the ideas and people that shape our world. So I write nonfiction.
That's awesome. I believe I have something from Idaho coming up in this week's episode that I'm going to be recording. I could be wrong. I may have bumped it. And Faith, yourself?
I'm Faith Prey, and I live in Port Townsend, Washington, a little seaport town in Washington, and I illustrate picture books and I write picture books. And I have a family of 4 kids and 4 animals, so they're very busy.
So Faith, can you just kick us off by telling us about the book that we'll be discussing today?
Yes, definitely. So How a Bear Became a Book is written by Annette Bay Pimentel, and the pictures are by me. And it is a book that is about the collaboration that created Winnie-the-Pooh, about Ernest Shepard, the illustrator. Well, it's about A. Milne, the author, who had this story, and Shepard, who is the illustrator who eventually became the one who did the Winnie-the-Pooh books. But it's more than that, too. Annette, maybe you want to kick in and talk about it.
Yeah, you described it great. Yeah, it's a story about how characters come to life in picture books, that it's not just an author's work or just an illustrator's work, but it's the combination of the two that really creates a story and a character that lives on in people's lives. And we use this as, it's a wonderful case, early case. It's 100 years old now. And it was at the beginning of offset printing. And so there was a lot of technological development that was happening that allowed them to do a lot of experimentation and start things that continue now. Like when Faith and I looked at the book, we were thinking in terms of spreads, like the whole from page to page. And they did that. They designed the pages, which really was not common to do at the time. And so it became a story about publication as well, and about how we think about stories with kids today.
And Annette, you said it was the beginning of offset printing. For some of the listeners not familiar with publishing, can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, I did a little bit of research, but I'm not an expert. But the earlier types of printing presses, it was difficult. You couldn't print pictures along with pages. So your pages were either text or pictures. And so you might have seen old books where it will have just like page after page of text. And then all of a sudden there's a page, they called them plates, that is stuck in with a picture. And it was actually a completely different printing process that was then inserted. And this new type of printing allowed them to put pictures with the words on the page. And so there really hadn't developed common practices of how to do that. And so this was one of the first books to think about how can the placement of the words actually kind of show some of the story and be used with the illustration to convey the story.
And Faith, when you're looking at these original books from Winnie the Pooh and how they looked back then, when you started illustrating for this book in particular, what type of styles, what kind of inspiration did you take from the original material?
Oh, yes. I could probably talk about the original source material all day. I am a huge fan of the Winnie-the-Pooh books. I was raised on them when I was little. My dad would read to my brothers and I from them every night. And so I guess I was pretty familiar with Ernest Shepard's work. And so, what an honor to get to illustrate a book honoring him. So, I spent a ton of time studying early sketches of Shepard's. I reached out to the archives at the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas. I think that's right. Sorry. And so they sent me like 100 pages, scans of sketches and letters. And I wanted to see just all kinds of materials from both creators because this book was about collaboration. So I wanted the art to have a little bit of both of them in it. But yeah, so I spent a lot of time reading books and sketching, doing like sketch studies of sketches that Ernest Shepard had done. And then I also did the same thing with ink and with watercolor, just to kind of get a solid rooting for the look of the art, I guess. So yeah, I would say I probably did hundreds of sketches of Winnie the Pooh and the characters just to kind of get a feel for it.
And Faith, you talked about looking at sketches and developing what your interpretation of this character would look like. Can you talk a little bit about how everybody knows Winnie the Pooh? Can you talk a little bit about what your limitations were when it came to what everybody's initial image of Winnie the Pooh is?
Well, obviously, in our modern times, Winnie the Pooh is the idea of Winnie the Pooh in a lot of people's minds is directly influenced by Disney, the Disney movies, and like I even saw them when I was a little kid, and so I would say that is kind of everywhere, and so it's really important to stay away from the Disney franchise when you're making art and books. So I just wanted to make sure that my Winnie the Pooh looked completely different from the Winnie the Pooh in the Disney movies. And all their products. I mean, their products are everywhere. So it kind of needs to look like its own thing.
Can I add something to this? The thing that Faith is not telling you is that in this book, the way the book starts is Winnie the Pooh is not yet anything except words. And then my text just says that he slowly becomes the art. And and I thought that that would be wonderful and fun to illustrate. And they actually reached out to someone who was not Faith to invite that person to illustrate them. And she thought about it, and then she came back and told them, "This book is fundamentally unillustratable because you have a character who is not shaped. And like, how can you create a character that is without a shape and then have it still be the same character?" And I was so worried. And Faith not only had the issues about honoring Ernest Shepard and like not verging into Disney territory, but also of like creating a character who had to change and yet remain consistent. And she did just an amazing job, and really gives you the sense that he is emerging from the words. And I had no idea how an illustrator was going to do that, but she managed it. So
Well, when I got the text and I saw that the idea was that a bear was going to emerge out of words, I think that kind of just lit me up. I was like, wait, I need this book. It was just so fascinating to me, the idea of something just totally different, something that would come out of ideas and I love the challenge of trying to figure out how to make it look like something on the page.
And so, this being a book about publishing, Annette, when you first got that note about this being unillustratable, did you find it in yourself or did you find any external pressure to have to make changes to the text to accommodate a picture book format?
Um, I thought that maybe even though they had told me that they were buying it, that it was not going to happen. I was super, super depressed. But the editor, Mark Podesta, he was great. And he said, "No, no, we will find somebody who can do this." So I was really concerned that I had done something that an illustrator couldn't do. I I have learned as I've been writing, I have learned to think more visually than I tend to, but mostly it's in terms of like where should the page turn? And I don't know actually what illustrators are going to put on the page of what I've written. And so I just put all my faith in what the editor said that he could find someone, and then he did. So, yeah. So I was worried for a few days though.
I've never been on that side of making a book where you write the book and you're not sure how it's going to turn out visually. That must have been such a wild experience for you to
Well,
not know what it was going to look like.
yeah, that's actually one thing that I really, really love. If I were an illustrator, I don't know if I would want to write the words because I love that, like seeing what someone else brings to it. So it is one of my favorite parts.
Faith, as someone who is both an illustrator as well as an author for picture books, can you talk a little bit about how your process typically goes when you're considering both the text and the pictures at the same time as the person doing both versus coming in with the text already done and having to put illustrations to it?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think I come into it thinking about both sides of it. I guess illustrators do anyway, but I'm thinking about the visual story, but I'm also thinking about the story that you're reading. And something that I love about Annette's text is that there are interweaving kind of like story layers to it. And so I wanted to make the art also have interweaving layers of story. So I ended up using like 4 different, I used pencil and ink and watercolor to create like the historical illustrations and the illustrations of Milne and Shepherd and the main little narrator character. But then I wanted to give our bear something totally different. So the bear is made out of screen printed paint, screen printed bears, and then on a mulberry paper. And then it's also made out of words that are reverse transferred. So I got scans. I bought a manuscript reproduction of the first Winnie-the-Pooh book. And then I used that to find different pages that felt like they were relevant to the pages that I was illustrating. And then I took those and I scanned them and I like flipped them so that I could then do them like a rubbing into the paper. And so that created this text that was all over the page. So anyway, multiple voices of story, but then I tried to do that with the illustrations as well.
I'm going to ask what's probably a dumb question. When you're using, this is just trying to clarify something so
No
I can
dumb
ask
questions.
my next question properly. When you have something that's like paint, charcoal, crayons, is that media or medium?
You know what? I had this argument with my mom recently because we could not decide, is it medium or medium? Media. And I looked it up. Like in dictionary.com and my Merriam-Webster app, and it was the same. But they're interlapping words, but when you're shopping for art supplies, usually you're looking at media. I don't know if that makes sense, but like I'm like mixed media, people say, but no, not media, mediums. Sorry, mediums. I'm looking for mediums when I'm looking for different kinds of art. I don't know.
Like I said, I wrote down multiple and then I left it blank because I couldn't remember what the word was. And that's just my brain couldn't.
I would say multiple mediums. I'm not is it etymologist? I'm not a word studier, so I'm not 100% sure.
Etymology, what do bugs have to do with this? So Faith.
Etymology, entomology. Which one is which? Well, anyway, okay.
That was the joke. So Faith, it sounds like you're using multiple mediums when creating the illustrations. Can you talk a little bit about where you decided to use one medium over another in different parts of the story?
Oh, sure. So to create art that kind of evoked Ernest Shepard's work, I wanted to use tools and mediums that he used. And so he did work a lot in pencil, and he did work in watercolor later in life in his books. And he also used ink. So that is what I did, those parts of the book. And then to decide on the screen print bears, mostly I just wanted to give kind of a little bit of like a ethereal shape to the bear so that we would be able to see it through. And then it would also kind of give you that feeling, this little bit of a golden honey tone to it throughout. So that's why I decided to do it with paint. But I tried many different versions of screen printing and block printing, and the paper it would be like too cloggy or too, I don't know. I couldn't get the right feel. And then I finally found like this very fibrous paper and it looked perfect on that. So that's what I ended up using, the mulberry paper.
And Annette, I have a question I wanted to ask, a line of questions rather, talking a little bit about how, since this is a story about publishing, what the publishing side for you was like. Was this a manuscript that you were approached to write for, or was this a story idea that you came up with and began to pitch?
Yeah, this was a story idea that I came up with. Our family lived abroad for a year, and I was looking for topics that I could research because my work is very archive dependent. And I saw that it was going to be the 100th anniversary of Winnie the Pooh, and I thought, oh, that's perfect because I could go and look in archives that will be much more accessible to me that year. And so I did a bunch of research, and I originally thought it was going to be an E.H. Shepard biography because there are some great A.A. Milne children's books about him or about how Winnie the Pooh started, but there hadn't been anything written about E.H. Shepard. And it just became really clear the more I researched it that what was interesting to me more than E.H. Shepard's life was the way the character developed. And so then it kind of shifted. And so what the editor eventually saw was a version very similar to what the book is. We did do significant changes, of course, through the revision process, but it was about the collaboration from the time that they saw. Yeah.
And do you see the finished and do you see the finished project as a story about E.H. Shepard, about the collaboration, or do you see it as the title says, How a Bear Became a Book? Do you see it more about the creation or the character itself?
I think that the two are pretty inextricably linked. I think that that we wouldn't have that character without the collaboration. I was really stunned during my research to see that there actually were publications before the books came out with illustrations from other authors, like a single chapter here or there that they were using for promotion. And just seeing the way other artists thought of Winnie the Pooh, I thought, wow, I don't think Winnie the Pooh would have survived without
No.
do you think that too, Faith?
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
like one of them, he's like 6 feet tall and wears a bow tie
Yes.
and
The bow
spats.
tie.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and so I realized that, oh, like the collaboration, like the character is dependent on that collaboration. So yeah, so I think both.
How would the world be different if the illustrator with the polka dot tie had done it?
Yeah,
Because so much has been affected by the
yeah.
Winnie the Pooh books and even the way art and words are on a page together now because of how art and words were on the page together then. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's actually really hard to wrap my mind around about what could have been different. So I'm very
And this does
glad
kind
that they
of
didn't do it.
Yeah.
and this does kind of go back to what we talked about previously, Annette, with how this was the beginning of offset printing. Before it would be a single plate of an illustration, and this was a chance for them to begin having the illustrations on the page, and that started to ask the question of when in the writing process do you start the illustrating? So, Faith, can you talk a little bit about when you came onto this project? Um, was there any point where there were anything that needed to? I suppose this is a question that can apply to both you and Annette. Was there any point in this collaboration where there needed to be adjustments made to accommodate the other person's input?
Oh, I think it's really important when you're doing a historical book to make sure that the author is able to check for what I want to say, like accuracy. So we wanted to make sure that Annette could have a look at everything and make sure that I didn't miss anything. I was using photos from I was using photos of Milne's house and different places and people, but if anybody had any corrections, I wanted to know what they thought.
I remember one example that I really, really loved the illustration, the sketch that Faith had done, where A.A. Milne first sees E.H. Shepard's art, and she had set it in a museum. And E.H. Shepard did exhibit stuff in museums, and all of the paintings had these gorgeous frames and stuff. But I knew that where he had seen his art was in the magazine office where
Yes.
they both worked. And so I sent this note to Mark and I said, "Oh, well, that's not really how it was, but I really like the illustration." And then Faith like redid it and it's beautiful. And she has these
That's right. That was
yeah,
perfect. Like, I like the idea of them kind of, figuratively standing in a gallery, but
yeah,
I I knew I was stretching it a little bit. So I was glad that you called it that because
yeah.
we figured out a solution to make it work without frames.
Yeah, but it was hard for me to say this is not historically accurate because I did really like the illustration, but we did keep it historically accurate.
And this being the 100th anniversary, and this again is going to be for both of you, Annette, how do you see that when writing this, the collaboration with the original creation and just collaborating with illustrators today, how do you see that that process has evolved, or how do you see that that process has not evolved over the last century?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really different is that um, A. Milne and E.H. Shepard, they like worked together on this. Like they went to the same place and things like that. And today in publishing, that doesn't happen. Faith and I have only seen each other and talked to each other once the book was all done. And so that's an interesting difference that the editor and the art director kind of play more of a go-between role. um, so there are advantages and disadvantages to that. I think it worked really well for this one. I'm super happy with how this book turned out and how it looks. So
Well, and I think that's something that's really fun about the way Annette wrote it is that there's back matter in the book that includes uh, the original editor, a couple of the editors,
mhm.
and of the Winnie the Pooh books, but then it also includes information about our editor and art
Yeah,
director, which I love.
yeah. I was really afraid that they would cut that part. So I was really glad that they went along with it. So,
I'm so glad they did. It just kind of honors the fact that a book, we put a lot of work into a book, but it becomes even better when we have a team of professionals putting everything together and
yeah.
making sure we don't miss anything.
Yeah, I was kind of wishing we had our copy editor here when there was the question about medium or media. So,
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, another thing, I wanted to make sure that I wanted to make sure I was okay using like actual something that had already been printed, like using scans from books of the Winnie the Pooh books and that manuscript. Just because I was like, are we going to get in trouble for using this in another print form? But they checked with the copy editors or whoever it is, sensitivity readers, I guess. Whoever they checked with, they checked and said it was.
That was actually something I was thinking about asking about. Since you were able to end up using the actual scans, did you have any fallback plans if that wasn't going to be approved?
I thought about like just hand lettering every single piece of writing, but with like tracing paper and then like rubbing it down. But it was gonna take about a year probably. No, it would have taken a while, but that was my secondary plan.
I feel like I'm obliged to ask this because it's so it's so well known, it's so popular, and so many people know Winnie the Pooh. Faith, who is your favorite Winnie the Pooh character?
I love that question. I'm in a critique group with some people. We are the Eeyore chat, but I'm not an Eeyore. I would say I'm probably personality wise.
And Annette?
um, well, Winnie the Pooh is the first one that comes to mind. I think in personality, maybe I'm a little pigletish, that yeah, going along with the really fun person and following their footsteps. I'm a young child, and I think I was the little piglet a lot.
I feel like all the characters play such an important role in teaching acceptance, especially acceptance when it comes to different emotions, such as Rabbit for when you're angry, Eeyore when a friend is sad. It's not about correcting the bad mood or temper. It's about accepting someone as they are, even if they're not in a happy mood. And those are definitely the two
I love that.
characters that I love the most.
I was going to ask who you most related to.
Related to, I would say Piglet, but favorite character, I would put Eeyore and then Rabbit for those exact reasons,
Nice.
because teaching acceptance and emotional maturity. My wife is giving me a look. Babe, who should be my favorite Winnie-the-Pooh character? She's saying Tigger. She's upset I didn't mention
Oh.
Tigger. Okay.
Your
and
hat
to
is
close,
a Tigger hat.
it does give off the Tigger vibes.
Yeah.
And to close out the interview, I love asking this question to all of my guests. It's open-ended, so feel free to respond however you like. Annette, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
Yeah, I feel like I write true stories for young readers about the people and the ideas, and usually the everyday people and the little tiny ideas that have shaped our world. And I want those readers to feel with me the wonder of how like small acts can have big impact. And I hope that the story under the story they will that they will get as they read my book and other people's books is that the world as it is now is not the way it has to stay, and that their actions can transform the world, that small actions make a big difference.
Ooh, I love that.
And Faith, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as both an illustrator and as a writer?
I think something that I'm really passionate about is kids having their own agency and feeling like, kind of in a similar way to what Annette said, but feeling like they too can create. And one of the things I love about this book is that it kind of takes an inside look at the bookmaking process and the creative process. So it's something that might inspire kids to feel, I don't know, like inspired to write their own stories or draw their own pictures. And I hope they also fall in love with our Winnie the Pooh, because this is a whole new generation of kids who get to find out about him.
Thank you. That was an interview with Annette Bay Pimentel and Faith Prey. Their new book, How a Bear Became a Book, the collaboration that created Winnie the Pooh, is out now. You can learn more about Annette and Faith at AnnetteBayPimental.com and FaithPrayBooks.com, respectively. If you appreciate the work being done on this show, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow on Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky at BookFairPod. Lastly, you can go to patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is free and there are no posts hidden behind a paywall. Of course, the best way to help the Book Fair podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.